Hello everyone, today I want to talk to you about a country with a population as large as the combined populations of Shatin and Yuanlong, which actually dares to step up and challenge China. In addition, some British media have shown a rare moment of clarity, pointing out that we shouldn't blame Trump. It's actually Europe itself that, through its own mistakes, has raised unrealistic hopes for Ukraine. Sometimes I wonder if my assessment of Europe is too harsh, but after reading an article by Matthew Syed, a columnist for The Times, I realized that there are Europeans who share views similar to mine. Recently, Matthew Syed published a commentary in The Times, and the main points are as follows. Trump's cynicism has never been in doubt, but why is it that Europe makes grand promises about Ukraine and then fails to follow through? Allow me to ask you, dear readers, can you explain the West's so-called high-pressure strategy? Have you ever really understood what Europe's strategic goals have been over the past 30 years and 9 months? For example, on November 21st, the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stated that Ukraine must decide its own future under its own sovereignty. Statements like this are basically meaningless. What use are such statements? As a professional commentator, I have tracked every declaration, every statement, and every action regarding Ukraine, and to this day, I still have no idea. Western leaders' rhetoric has always been impressive. They say things like, "We will stand with Ukraine," or "We will spare no effort," and so on. If victory in war could be built on words alone, Russia would have already lost and Ukraine would have been liberated by now. However, as Matthew Child said, the question he wants answered is, we know what Western leaders have been saying, but Ukrainians are under the illusion that the West will always stand by their side, believing that in the end they will drive Russia back in this crazy war. But what are Western leaders really thinking in their hearts? At least President Trump, because we see the reality clearly. Masha Gessen said that before the 2024 US election, she had already warned that America would abandon Ukraine because, as Trump has clearly stated, he prefers to act based on a narrow view of national interest, so-called America First. For those who don't care for Trump's way of doing things, he may seem unpredictable, but Trump's essence is to look for the weaknesses of other countries in order to exploit them, just as he is doing now. Ukraine is suffering defeat after defeat on the battlefield and is mired in corruption scandals. Trump is now joining forces with Putin to impose an agreement whose purpose is to dismember Ukraine, annex its territory, and permanently block it from joining NATO. The Trump administration believes that now is the best time to reach an agreement. Among the 28 peace proposals put forward by the United States, what does Trump stand to gain? He would receive a 50% share of the investment profits within Ukraine, using this as a stepping stone for further deals with Russia in the mineral sector. We may not like this situation, right? But at the very least, this can be seen as Trump's straightforwardness. When people are desperately pleading, why do Western allies always hesitate when it comes to providing anti-tank weapons, long-range artillery, main battle tanks, advanced systems, and even fighter jets? Why are Western sanctions so full of loopholes, allowing Russian oil to keep flowing into the global market, effectively becoming the Kremlin's real cash machine for its war effort? According to Maxadroid, with the broad support of his readers, he keeps raising these questions but only ever gets the same old answers. Western politicians can't even explain the most basic core objectives in plain language, and before any real questioning, they just trot out a bunch of cliches. Especially when reading reports about the suffering caused by war, this kind of attitude is truly astonishing. The truth is that the blood and sacrifice of the Ukrainian people seem utterly meaningless. In the end, Russia will achieve its demands. Europe doesn't really have any policy or strategy. It's just a terrible farce performed by multiple countries together, which he finds quite remarkable. While international affairs experts provide in-depth analysis of the situation in Ukraine, few people mention the truth that future generations will inevitably see clearly. In the proud West of the 2020s, they actually lost to a country with a declining economy, one that's far weaker than even Italy. Russia, he says it's almost unbelievable, like seeing a ghost. The combined GDP of the EU and the UK is 10 times that of Russia, and their population is nearly 4 times larger. This should have been the most lopsided power comparison since 1939, yet Europe has remained a bystander. Because of this, he feels justified in making a reasonable guess about Europe's clumsy and chaotic response. First of all, European leaders are worried that a tough response would provoke Moscow into escalating, especially since Putin keeps threatening to start a nuclear war. Secondly, while Europe may be strong in terms of total financial power, it is weak when it comes to military capabilities. Decades of underinvestment in defense have led to a decline in military strength and a dangerous dependence on American equipment. The root cause of this lack of investment is that funds which should have been allocated to defense have instead been poured into an ever-expanding bottomless pit. the welfare system, which remains unresolved to this day. He said that Europeans are like someone who frequently dines at upscale restaurants, fully aware of how much money they actually have in their wallet, but refusing to admit they're out of money. What keeps everything going is nothing more than a bystander's illusion. There are also well-established channels that facilitate Russian funds involved in money laundering through London's financial centre and donations to the Conservative Party, as well as Russia's infiltration strategies that have penetrated deeply into Germany, France, Belgium, Brussels, and even wider regions. All of these have contributed to long-term fiscal and psychological strategic weaknesses, gradually eroding Europe's confidence and unity. Up to now, Europe has responded with assistance, bearing witness to all of this unfolding. After reading the Times report, although it approaches the issue from a European perspective, it is also a realistic analysis. Europe must either fully commit to fighting Russia or, like Trump, maintain a new set of interests, rather than sticking to the current attitude of having no strategy towards Ukraine, yet deceiving themselves and others by raising Ukraine's hopes and sending them to fight a hopeless war. In the international community, there are only two paths: survival or destruction. There is no middle ground. With this kind of absurdity, it further highlights how some small countries, as insignificant as ants, keep stepping forward to challenge major powers like China. This country is the small Baltic state of Estonia. Some time ago, during his visit to China on January 4th, Estonia's Foreign Minister Tsahkna said that he told China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi that Russia poses an existential threat to Europe and Estonia. He said he reminded Wang Yi that without China's support, Russia would not be able to launch such a large-scale invasion of Ukraine. If China wants to maintain good relations with Estonia, these issues must be resolved. After returning to the country, our new Foreign Minister Tsahkna spoke again. He said that China ignored Estonia's ultimatum, either maintain good relations with us or with Russia. He added that Estonia's patience is almost exhausted, and this is the final warning. When the WeChat public account Cotton Flying Water was mentioned by Observer Network in relation to this matter, they commented quite well, saying that many people still don't really understand the mighty Estonian Empire. So let's take a look at just how powerful they really are. First of all, Estonia is now so strong that it doesn't even consider Russia a threat anymore. Under the leadership of the Vice Chairman of the Cultural Committee and EU Foreign Minister, who is also the former Estonian Prime Minister Kallas, Estonia has been the most vocal against Russia. According to media outlet OS, Estonia is preparing to launch a preemptive strike against Russia. The headline reads, "Estonia tells Russia, we will strike first, we will fight like demons." They said that within 4 years, they will increase their national defense spending to 5.4% of GDP and have already strengthened their border defenses with Russia. Next, let's talk about Estonia's naval power, which has surprised some people. The mighty Estonian Navy once deployed all of its naval forces, including the patrol ship EML Kindral Kervits and the patrol boat EML Risto. They attempted to hijack a Russian cruise ship and even tried to directly confront the Russian Navy's warships during the process. Unfortunately, they were not successful. The Russian Navy probably feared that if they accidentally sank Estonia's tiny patrol boat, it would cause a huge international incident. In addition, Estonia's air force is also said to be one of the best in the world, to the point where the Estonian leader announced that all their fighter jets would be transferred to Ukraine. However, when outsiders looked into it, they discovered that Estonia actually never had any in the first place. As for fighter jets, what they actually have are just a few helicopters, 2 M28 transport planes, 4 R-44 trainer helicopters, and 3 L-39C advanced jet trainers. That's the entirety of Estonia's air force. Seeing such a powerful air force, it's no wonder they dared to issue a final warning to China. As for the Estonian Empire's army, it only has 7,000 personnel. Compared to Russia's 1.5 million soldiers, their numbers are indeed much smaller, but I believe their courage must be great. Estonia issuing a final ultimatum to China, if you look closely, seems more like a farce. Estonia has to choose between siding with China or maintaining good relations with Russia. This situation is like an ant threatening an elephant. The ant says to the elephant, "Elephant, if you ignore my final warning, my patience will soon run out. This is your last warning. Don't blame me if I block your way. If we just stick out our foot, we could crush you." Estonia, a country known for producing fierce politicians, actually only has a population of 1.37 million. In fact, the combined population of Shatin and Yuanlong in Hong Kong is 1.38 million, which is 10,000 more than Estonia. Even Ukraine, which had a pre-war population of 40 million, wasn't as arrogant as Estonia. The reason Estonia dares to speak this way is because it hides under the protection of the EU and NATO. In terms of global geopolitical dynamics, Estonia has no leverage over China at all. Whether in terms of military, economic, or diplomatic power, Mearsheimer believes that a small country acting like an empire is because its politicians have received significant support from American elite groups such as the Soros Foundation. The chairman of the National Committee, von der Leyen, also encourages this kind of unrealistic posturing, which leads them to treat their arrogance as a gift to be presented to the American elite. To sum up, first, Estonia's ultimatum to China will not bring about any consequences. When faced with a country whose population is comparable to that of Shatin or Yuanlong, China can't even be bothered to respond. Second, Estonia's boldness in doing this exposes the problems within the EU and NATO. A small country hiding behind big powers, making noise and playing political games everywhere without any cost will naturally become more and more reckless. The Cold War was played out in the same way. Before February 24, 2022, if Zelensky hadn't blindly believed that the US and the EU would support him to win this war, all he had to do was promise not to join NATO, and Russia wouldn't have started the war, Ukraine wouldn't have lost 20% of its territory or suffered such heavy casualties, and Europeans wouldn't have had to endure high inflation and expensive heating gas. So don't think that reckless actions by small countries will never come with a price. The fact that the Prime Minister of such a tiny country like Estonia, Kallas, can become the EU's foreign minister just because she's tough on Russia without anyone knowing what direction she'll take the EU really reflects how frightening the EU's personnel system is. Take Annalena Baerbock, the German trampoline athlete turned Green Party foreign minister. After stepping down because of her tough stance on Russia, she managed to land a cushy position as president of the UN General Assembly. This is exactly how Western democracies reward radical policies. They only care about standing out, regardless of the consequences for their own countries. How can countries like this possibly be well governed? This is exactly how the mechanism of Europe's self-deceiving politics, as described by The Times, comes about.